For centuries, historians, archaeologists, and geneticists have tried to reconstruct the story of the first peoples of South America who arrived over 12,000 years ago. Many believed that the general outlines were already established. They thought genetic ancestry in the Southern Cone could be categorized into just a few major threads, linking the Andes, Amazonia, and Patagonia. But a just-published large-scale DNA study revealed that the story was not only incomplete, but contained an entire missing chapter. The researchers uncovered a deep, previously unknown ancestral lineage that persisted for more than 8,000 years in what is now Argentina. Suddenly, the genetic map of South America, one of the last places settled by humans, had to be redrawn. This discovery, published in Nature, shows that a lineage arose by at least 8,500 years ago and flourished in central Argentina through the colonial period, remaining a major ancestral component of native descendants today. The genetic continuity found here is remarkable, persisting even during times of climate upheaval, demographic change, and cultural transformations. As geneticist David Reich explains, these ancient people represent an early population that radiates into lots of other lineages, and he notes that their existence signals an initial period of very rapid expansion across the continent, followed by long-term regional stability. It is a stunning conclusion. One of the major indigenous roots of Argentina today comes from a distinct lineage that has remained unbroken for almost 9 millennia. To understand the people who embodied this deep ancestry before the time of European contact, one can look closely at the Quirandi, one of the Het peoples of the Pampas region. They were tall, robust, semi-nomadic hunters whose name, given by the Guarani, meant men of fat, referring to their reliance on animal fat as a staple food. They lived across a broad region of central Argentina, including what is now much of Buenos Aires province. The Quirandi were famously fast runners, able to chase down deer, ostriches, and guanaco. They wielded bows and arrows as well as bolas, stone weights connected by leather cords, which they used skillfully in battle. When Pedro de Mendoza founded Buenos Aires in 1535, the Quirandi initially traded food for Spanish goods. Soon, however, relations deteriorated. In 1536, Mendoza sent his brother Diego to subjugate them. The Quirandi repelled the expedition on the banks of the Luján River, neutralizing Spanish cavalry using bolas. According to one of the soldiers, 40 Spaniards and 1,000 allied indigenous allies were killed in the battle. This defeat forced the eventual abandonment of the settlement of Buenos Aires. Their physical stature, martial skills, and rugged mobility made the Quirandi one of the hardest indigenous groups for Europeans to confront. One Quirandi leader was noted as being extremely well built, over 2 meters tall, about 6.5 feet tall. Their skulls and bones were also noted to be very thick and robust by later anthropologists. The Quirandi carried substantial proportions of the deep central Argentine lineage identified in the new study. When ancient genomes from throughout the Americas began to accumulate, most results appeared to fall into 3 broad clusters: the Central Andes, Amazonia, and the central Chile-Patagonia Pampas complex. Yet a huge tract of Argentina, stretching from the Andean foothills to the eastern plains, remained essentially invisible. Archaeologists knew people had lived there for at least 12,000 years, and scattered cultural sites could be dated to multiple periods. Nevertheless, ancient DNA from this vast region, called the Central Southern Cone, was almost non-existent. This new study sought to fill that void. Researchers screened 344 bone and tooth samples from 310 individuals who lived between 10,000 and 150 years ago, ultimately recovering genome-wide information from 238 of them, an enormous quantity for South American archaeogenetics. Their analysis focused on understanding how ancient people in central Argentina related to neighboring cultural and biological areas. To the Andes in the west, Amazonia to the north, the Pampas and Patagonia to the south, and Brazil to the east. The question was deceptively simple. Were the people of the central southern cone simply a genetic mixture of these nearby populations, or could they represent something different? The answer was wholly unexpected. The researchers identified an individual from Jesus Maria, dated to 8,500 years before present, known as Jesus Maria 8,500, and demonstrated that he was the earliest representative of a previously unrecognized lineage that would persist in the region for the next 8,000 years. This lineage formed the core ancestry of later populations in the Pampas and concentrated strongly in the central plains and hill regions of present-day Córdoba and San Luis provinces. This population did not simply appear briefly and disappear, but instead maintained genetic and cultural continuity across deep time. Individuals from the central region between 4,200 and 150 years ago were found to be largely homogeneous, matching the signal of the early Jesus Maria ancestor. Remarkably, many modern Argentine individuals still carry this same lineage as a major portion of their native ancestry. In the words of the authors, they identified genome-wide data from 238 ancient individuals spanning 10 millennia, and found that individuals dating to 4,600 years ago primarily descended from a previously unsampled deep lineage. This reveals no small story. Instead, a major ancestral branch of American prehistory had been hiding in plain sight, preserved in bones, stored in regional museums, and often unstudied for generations. This includes a mysterious Australasian ancestry component also found in Brazilian and Patagonian samples. Nevertheless, one of the most intriguing findings concerns isolation. The central Argentina lineage persisted even while surrounded by major population spheres. Archaeological and linguistic data show intense cultural interactions linking the Andes, Gran Chaco, Pampas, and coastal regions. However, the genetic continuity tells a different story. The study records little evidence of interregional migration into central Argentina during the entire period studied. Even dramatic environmental events, such as the mid-Holocene dry period between 6,000 and 4,000 years ago, do not appear to have altered its persistence. Elsewhere in the world, major changes in agriculture, language, or technology are often accompanied by large-scale population replacement. The expansion of Neolithic farmers throughout Europe, for example, dramatically reshaped the continent's genetic makeup. Yet in central Argentina, archaeological evidence suggests new crops and tools arrived around 1,500 years ago, but the local genetic signature remained the same. This implies that innovations arrived not with new people, but through cultural transmission. As the study explained, the population mixed with people from elsewhere in South America only at the region's edges, and despite cultural shifts, the population is the same. This resilience carried through the late pre-contact period. Only after 700 years ago did central Argentina ancestry begin to dominate the Pampas, replacing older local lineages through admixture rather than displacement. The new data also shed light on the earliest millennia of South American history. One woman from central Argentina, dated to 10,000 years ago, shared more genetic similarity with other individuals from the southern cone than with ancient samples from Peru or Brazil. She lived at the same time as the mysterious Lagoa Santa people of Brazil, who had very unusual burial customs involving removing the head and hands and placing the hands over the face. That pattern suggests that by 10,000 years ago, distinctive regional ancestries had already formed, and that the southern cone was settled extremely rapidly after the first entry into the Americas. Reich notes that this individual is part of an early population that radiates into lots of other lineages, implying that the settlement wave through South America split quickly into evolving regional groups. Across the centuries, the peoples of central Argentina spoke numerous languages and practiced varied cultural lifeways. Some groups lived in the Córdoba hills, while others occupied the central plains. Archaeology reveals distinct mortuary traditions, pottery styles, and tool assemblages. Linguistic and ethnographic records attest to complex cultural variation at the moment of Spanish arrival. Yet genetic analysis paints a different picture. Across thousands of years, the people occupying these regions remained broadly related, forming a continuous genetic community. In the words of the researchers, most individuals from central Argentina were consistent with being genetically homogeneous, implying stability across millennia. Even marriage practices show structure within this coherence. In the Andean world, social units called Ailu encouraged preferential marriage among kin. The study finds that northwest Argentina shows higher rates of close kin unions paralleling the central Andes, suggesting cultural influence from the Inca and their predecessors. In contrast, central Argentina appears to have avoided this pattern. This implies a patchwork of cultural interactions superimposed upon a stable genetic background. The discovery of this deep central Argentina lineage compels scholars to rethink South American prehistory. The southern parts of the continent were not simply passive recipients of migrants from the Andes or Amazonia. Instead, an indigenous ancestry developed here early, persisted locally, and later contributed substantially to other regions. By 3,300 years ago, this lineage began mixing into the Pampas, eventually becoming the dominant ancestry there by 800 years ago. This timeline corresponds with population growth, new subsistence practices, and the advent of pottery, indicating that cultural and demographic transformations were underway, but did not erase the genetic signature of Central Argentine peoples. The implications reach much farther. Not only does the discovery change how scholars understand the spread of humans through the Southern Cone, it also reframes the cultural history of the colonial era. The indigenous groups encountered by Europeans, including the powerful Querandí, carried genetic histories stretching back 8 millennia, forming one of the oldest demonstrably continuous lineages in the Americas. The new study has transformed our understanding of prehistoric Argentina. It shows that the central Southern Cone harbored a distinct genetic lineage already present 10,000 years ago, clearly defined by 8,500 years ago, and persistent until living memory. This was not a transient population washed over by waves of newcomers. Instead, it endured through environmental extremes, cultural innovations, and colonial disruption. This lineage, once invisible, now occupies its rightful place as a major ancestral branch of native South American history. As Reich and his colleagues argue, its existence reflects the earliest flowering of population diversification following the peopling of the Americas, followed by a uniquely stable regional history. In a continent of vast migrations and cultural exchanges, the people of central Argentina stand out as a story of continuity. Their genes whisper of ancient hunters, of battles on the pampas, of lineages rooted in the land through 8,000 years of change. Their rediscovery is not only a scientific triumph, but a restoration of a forgotten chapter in the human story. Thank you for watching, and click on this other video to learn more.